Welcome to another episode of Chasing the Upside, conversations on living the FPL life. Today, my guest is FPL analyst Jian Batra. Our chat explores where you can find the edge in FPL, how to react to setbacks, and the best piece of FPL advice he has ever been given. Jian Batra, welcome to Chasing the Upside. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. I'm really well. Thank you for taking the time out to speak to me today about all things FPL. I suppose a good starting point would be where it started for you. So what is your FPL origin story, I suppose?
So yeah, I haven't been playing for too long compared to most people. I think I started maybe like 5 years ago playing properly. I used to play a bit for like my uncle here and there, but I never really took it seriously. And I think it was around the time I was about 16, so about 5 years ago, that I started to play a bit more seriously. And then gradually, I think my first introduction into like serious FPL was Big Mum Bucker's threads. And then when I started reading those, then I quickly got into content creation after that, and I started to play a bit more seriously.
Interesting. So did the addiction sort of kick in shortly after you sort of realized that there was another sort of world or community that is dedicating itself to getting better at the game? Is that where it sort of really gained momentum for you?
Yeah, so like I would say I love FPL and fantasy football. I wouldn't say I'm addicted though. I think I can separate myself quite well from it. I don't get too upset by it either. Like maybe a little bit frustration in the moment, but I can pass that by fairly easily. So, but I do love it. Like I think it's brilliant. And yeah, that definitely like transpired, and increased when I got into content creation. I think I started just to think about the game a bit more deeply. And then when you're like interacting with so many people producing content, it's kind of a necessity for you to at least put more like thinking effort into it.
That's great. The fact that you said you're not, you don't have an addiction. Obviously, that's a strong word, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Because I think, like at the time that we're recording this, it's been one of the weirdest weeks that I can remember in terms of, reasonably good weekly scores, just being smashed out the park.
Yeah.
Me myself, I think I went down 1.5 million to the worst overall rank I've had for bloody ages.
Yeah.
But I'm not alone. Just unless you had certain players. So I suppose the question is, yes, you're not addicted, but you love it, which is great. You mentioned frustration there. How do you deal? Are you good at dealing with the setbacks and the poor game weeks?
Yeah, honestly, like not in a cocky way, but I'd say I am quite good at it. Like I see quite a bit of stuff on the timeline, like people getting upset, but I don't really get too upset. I think in maybe, I don't know, hour or two after the game, I'll be a bit annoyed. Like after the Newcastle game, I was a bit annoyed. I was like, how's Trippier walked out of here with an 18 pointer, Botman's on 12. So I wasn't best pleased with that. But at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal in life, if we're being honest. Like we all have far more important things that like we have to be concerned about. And like we said, it's a hobby. It's meant to be fun. Now there's a competitive element to it, so of course you want to win, and I encourage that. I think that should be at the forefront of when you're doing the activity. But when things don't go your way, similarly with life, I think sometimes you just have to take it on the chin and just go from there. Like you sulking about it's going to get you nowhere, so you may as well see like that the grass is pretty green and keep going.
Yeah, I do agree. You always have to pull yourself up, say, look, this is literally is meant to be fun. And the fun element, I think, is the great weeks and the bad weeks, because you can't have one without the other, can you? So yeah, I think that's really important. Do
Definitely.
you with your sort of content creation and how, I mean, I'm always amazed on Twitter how much you're analyzing, I suppose, and always giving your opinion on things. How Talk me through that process. Do you watch a lot of games? Do you just look at the data? What's your process in terms of analyzing, I suppose, what makes a good FPL pick, and what doesn't?
Yeah, sure. So I very rarely look at data, like very, very rarely. It's pretty much my own eye test, maybe some inputs from outside the FPL sphere, and then I'll kind of go from there. But yeah, my analysis is very much based around what I personally see and think, because I kind of feel like if I'm using anything else, and it's almost someone else's analysis that I'm bringing to my work, so in a way it's I'm kind of copying them, but at least like when I do it, it's purely my eye test, what I see. I think I've got a decent footballing eye, so I can apply that to FPL, and then go from there.
So you're very rarely data. That's really interesting, because I think a lot of people with all the tools that we have are sort of a mixture of both. I don't know. Obviously, you've got the people that are purely eye test or purely data, and then a lot of people are sort of in the middle. So that's fascinating. The fact that you very rarely use data.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. It's not like how I like to perceive the game and how, look at the game. That's not to say that I don't think there's any value in it. I'm sure there is. And for example, like I picked Eze this weekend. One of the reasons, and one of the reasons I say it's like one of the few instances, is that I picked Eze because one of the reasons was he had good data right behind him. So it's not like I completely object to it. I understand the perspective of why people like it, but for me personally, I think in the long run, at least, I trust my own eye test a bit more than the data. In all honesty, I should probably incorporate the data more into my analysis, and go for a bit of a via media approach. And that's just that. Yeah, that's just being honest. I probably should, but as of now, I don't particularly do that too much.
You mentioned Eze there, and if anybody's going to pass the eye test, it is Eze. I think he's one of the most beautiful footballers to watch. I
Yeah,
just
he's
love.
very like he's got good movements. There's a lot of good things about him. I like it's a very talismanic figure in that Palace side. It's one of the reasons I picked him. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and he hasn't quite probably got the points that he deserves this season, but I'm sure it's going to come. I was speaking to a Crystal Palace supporter the other day, and he wasn't comparing the two, but he said in terms of just looking at the play and how graceful they are, it's like watching Zidane.
That's high praise for
It
Eze. I'm not
really
sure
is
if I'd go
now.
that far, but
Yeah,
that's high
he
praise
was.
for Eze.
He wasn't saying it in terms of where he is, but just yeah, so looking at him, and yeah, I mean, I probably do a full podcast on just Eze, but anyway, we will move on. Anyhow. But so in terms of your relationship with the Twitter community, or the FPL on Twitter, when you were first getting engaged, was it the community that is now, or has it changed in the sort of 4 or 5 years that you've actually been playing properly?
It's it's changed, but not as much as maybe I think it's made out to be. I think it's changed in the terms of mainly its reach. When I was starting out, no one really cared about FPL, but now you have so many celebrities, and I know for a fact like a lot of Prem players play it. I know like people there's a lot of eyes on FPL, right? From all different corners of the globe, and all different industries, including footballers. So I think that's one thing that's only going to continue to increase in terms of the community, the reach it has. I wouldn't say it's changed massively. I think it's got a lot bigger, and there are a lot more people actually in the community. Um, but I wouldn't say it's changed too much. No, I think like the guys who were the big names 2-3 years ago pretty much still are. Obviously, you get some newcomers. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's changed too much, to be honest.
Has it changed the way you play the game? Because I mean, you seem, just in our chat, you seem quite measured, and seemingly, if you're going to make a mistake, whatever that is, you want it to be on your terms rather than following bandwagons or anything like that. And maybe we'll talk about your decision process in a minute. But has it changed the way you play at all? The constant opinions, constant questions, because you can be sort of pulled in so many directions. So I'd be interested to see if it has changed the way you play.
Yeah, I think it definitely has changed the way I play, and I hope it was in a good way that I'm learning. If we're being completely honest, I don't have the best record. Certainly, out of like the content creators, it's an okay record, but it's nothing to scream about. But I do think I'm gradually getting better at the game. I think being what's good for me is I'm always surrounded by like the best. Like working at the hub, for example, I talked to Rich Clark. I've podded with him numerous times. I've met him. And when you're around that sphere of influence, people like him, Adam Hopcroft, Abdul, you can only get better, right? Because there's constantly going to be like, do this, not do this, but it's just good advice. So I think it's definitely improved the way I think about FPL. I think the mistakes I make are always quite of a similar nature. I'm a bit too aggressive. I ultimately, whilst I understand the appeal of a very good rank, I think the satisfaction of getting an amazing rank, I'm talking like top 100, and ultimately winning it and pursuing that is far more worthwhile than just settling for something lower or aiming for something lower. So I think inevitably at times my rank may not be that good. I had a very swingy season last season. I've had a very swingy start here. And I'm okay with that. Like I know what I'm trying to achieve, so that's fine. But to answer your question, yeah, most definitely, I've definitely changed how I approach the game since being introduced to the community and some very smart people.
Does you mentioned rank there? I've got a couple of questions, but the first one that sprang to mind is you mentioned rank, and because you're, the amount of followers you have and the amount of reach that you do have, if you're on podcasts, the first thing people look at potentially is where you are in terms of game week rank.
Yeah.
And then if you're advising people, it's probably an easy thing for people to say is, well, why should I listen to this person? Why should I listen to that person? Look at their rank. So with that in mind, you obviously want the best rank possible. So does that cloud your decision making?
Of
Because,
course.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I think people are very, very fair to judge content creators' ranks. I think like it should definitely hold weight. Like you shouldn't just listen to someone regardless of how good it is, just if their rank's horrible, right? So like over a consistent period of time. So I think it's very fair. And it's definitely something that like I think about. And I'm well aware that for me, and I remember at the start, because when I initially started producing content, I was having a pretty bad season. It was actually my worst season ever. And I did kind of think like it is a bit weird of me to be advising people when I'm not doing so well myself this year. And I've kind of just come to terms with the fact that like that's going to happen. And if people are going to talk, I think that's fair. I think it's warranted. But I think deep down, I know that like I have the capability of producing some good ranks. I think like last year, for example, I got a 50k rank, which when I think the game is getting considerably harder, it's quite respectable. It's not brilliant, but it's respectable and it's showing I'm improving. And the other thing is, I think the content creation is like at the moment is very much focused on the footballing side of things, and I don't think there's too much strategy behind it. So you can be like an excellent football analyst and therefore a good content creator, but not so good at the game, because I think the game is obviously far more strategic based, which doesn't get talked about too much in content creation. But for sure, like it definitely does play on my mind. And I think having a good record is something that it's very fair for people to judge you on when you're producing content. So I don't mind it. Like if someone says like, oh, someone left a comment, and I understand it.
But do you think if you feel that being slightly more conservative with your decisions over the season will get you a better rank? It may not get you in the top 100, it may not get you in the top 1,000, but it will get you consistently, say, in the top 50k. Would you ever change because of that, or no, this is the way I play and the rank will be what it will be?
No, I'm not interested in changing that. I think like I'd rather get like and look, the community is an extreme nice community, right? We've got a fantastic community, and like I said, it's not like my history is like awful. It's just not as good as the likes of Rich Clark. So I think yeah, it would be probably sensible for me to go after like play very template and get a 50k rank, but that's just not me. I think it's far more worthwhile to pursue at least one fantastic season. And I'm fine to take the flack of it and the negative side of it.
You said, well, you mentioned improvement. And anybody that's played FPL for more than, probably a season or two, will know that there is luck involved. Of course, you can make the best decisions and still come out the wrong side. So with that in mind, with the big swings in luck, what to you is improvement? Is it just rank? Because you could make incredible decisions all season long and actually have a worse rank than the season before where you just got lucky. So how do you, if it's not rank, how do you judge improvement in your FPL game?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. With regards to luck, I don't really view it as everyone else does. I think ultimately whatever happens to you, in my personal opinion, is fair. Not just in FPL, but in life. And I know a lot of people disagree with that, but that's just my personal opinion. So I don't ever really get down if I get unlucky, or yeah, if I get unlucky, then so be it. That's fine. I deserve it. And if I get lucky, so be it. I deserve it. Like, I'll give myself a pat on the back as much as I'll give myself a slap on the wrist. For me, improving is just purely about decision-making processes. On reflection, game week 2, should I have started João Pedro over Matoma and it was a 12-point swing? No. Now, I'm not saying that because it was a bad outcome, but with the expected minutes concerns, I probably shouldn't have been so aggressive after one decent performance against Luton and started Matoma. Should I have brought Eze in this week? Well, it was an extremely aggressive move, and it hasn't worked now. It's left me in a bit of a tough spot. So was that the best decision? Over the long run, probably not. So for me, it's just assessing the decision-making processes, reflecting on those and refining them. And ultimately, if I keep doing that, eventually I will become a very, very good player.
So that leads us perfectly onto the decision process. How structured are you when it comes to transfers? Do you have a real definite start your process here, go through this, and then come out the other end, or is it completely haywire? Yeah, talk us through that, because I think that would be really interesting for people to hear how you come to your decisions, I suppose.
Yeah, so I mean, I always make my transfers late, always. Friday, Saturdays, as close to the deadline as possible, right? I like having as much information and time as possible. In terms of the actual transfers, you'd be surprised. There's not too much time that goes into it. And the reason is, when you're producing content and you're on Twitter basically every day of every week, naturally you have to be, you consume so much information that you can kind of paint the picture very easily, right? I don't have to sit down with pen and paper and try to figure everything out, because naturally, just by doing the processes of creating content, I already would have known X, Y, Z, and reading someone else's work or watching someone else's thing. So by the time you actually have to make the decision, there's not much. You just have to, I guess, assess my own team, see the long-term and short-term implications. Doesn't take very long, and then go from there. So in terms of how like that process is, it's not very long. It's the content creation and consumption basically sorts itself out.
Yeah, I'm certainly, not a great player at all. I love the game, but when I've got my process is, don't think about it too much until probably Thursday, but just take in some podcasts, see what opinions are out there, and let it kind of all wash over you to a certain extent, and then you kind of come to what feels right at the time. Now, of course, there's the odd 50-50 where you can go on websites and things. But yeah, I'm quite similar. And I think a lot of people are in that way. Yeah, it is interesting. Has that changed over the years, the decision making process?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's probably the thing that's changed the most.
Okay.
And as I referenced earlier, the sphere of influence. But in previous seasons and even up to the last one, I was too weighted towards making decisions with my gut. And not even from an analytical perspective where I would think different to the crowd. I mean, purely just a gut feeling and how I felt. Sometimes without a serious lack of rationale behind it. However, this season, and I kind of refined that over preseason, I knew this was something I had to change. I've used my gut far less, and it's something I'm far happier with. So yeah, that's certainly something I've improved on there.
So it's less gut, but you said earlier completely eye test. So it's just about watching more games, is it for you?
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, I watch games, but at the same time, I listen to others. There's, for example, the Green Arrow podcast is great. The Why is great. There are some really good threads on Twitter. So it's basically my eye tests plus the content I trust, and that's about it. Yeah.
Do you keep to quite a tight schedule with regards to watching games, or is it the Super Sunday, couple of those, match of the day, and call it good? Or do you try and watch, 4 or 5 games per weekend?
It kind of depends on, like, for example, like last weekend, I was out Saturday, right? So I didn't watch any of the games. And if there's a game that I need to go and catch the highlights of, I'll watch like 8 to 9 minute extended highlights on YouTube. I never watch match of the day. It's just easier now to just go on YouTube. So, and then in terms of the amount of games I'll watch whatever interests me. Like, I wouldn't have watched Sheffield United Newcastle. I only watched the second half, right? I went out to watch the North London derby, so I didn't watch the first half of Sheffield United Newcastle, and that wouldn't really bother me because I know I can get enough from other people if need be on those subjects, and I can just watch some highlights. So I just watch games as I please, but I do enjoy watching games, so that's why like I clock up a decent amount.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing about nowadays is that you can. Oh, I was speaking to Adam from the Above Average
Hmm.
podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he said sort of the same thing: is that if you don't watch a game, there's so much information out there that will give you pretty much information that you need.
Yeah.
So that's lovely, isn't it? Because if you really had to watch, if to get very good at FPL, you needed to watch a hell of a lot of games, it could get a bit grating, and I think it could become a bit of a grind, and that's you don't really want that.
To be fair though, I do watch like in at least this season, I've certainly watched like a lot of games. Like I've watched a good amount of games, hence why like I can give these eye test reports because I am watching the football.
Mm, mm. So with more and more people playing, actually there seems to be, in terms of millions, less this year, doesn't there? Which is a bit strange.
I think it's very close. I think at the moment
Okay.
it's very, very close. I heard that they did clamp down on bots a bit, so that might have something to do with it.
That's another
But I
2
heard it's
million
very
gone
close.
So with 9, 10, 11 million, whatever it is. So with all so many players, so much information out there for those players, where do you think the edge for FPL players now?
I think personally, I believe data has a cap, and it's kind of why. Look, like I said earlier, I should get into it more, and maybe this will inspire me to do so. But I think data does have a cap in the sense that you can be the best interpreter of statistics in the world, but someone with a good eye test will kill you every time. I think like there's a reason that, for example, that all the top managers in world football, whilst they may use statistics, they heavily rely on their own eye, right? Like Guardiola, I'm sure he uses statistics and stuff, but at the end of the day, like he didn't come up last season with a 3-2-2-3 because of some stats. So I think essentially getting your eye test to a level where it's so good you can see things that others can't, and also data can be very misleading and sometimes hard to interpret. Not to toot my own horn too much, but for example, the Sun Hall, right, that I picked up in Gaming 3, Gaming 4 when I got him ahead of Burnley. Like I heard so many people talk about how that was a bad performance against Bournemouth, but having watched that entire game, I was very pleased with it, and I was very confident in my selection there. And I think being able to do that over a long period of time, and just understanding the game a bit better than everyone else is probably where your best chance of an edge is, alongside like being good mentally. For example, like being patient, not getting too upset. Because I think these things, like at the end of the day, it's a game, right? And you have to be good at the strategic elements of a game. There's so many good footballers who have been talented, but they didn't have the right mentality to go alongside. And I think that applies to FPL as well. So I think those two areas are where I would try and get an edge in.
Mm. Yeah, I love that, because I think that I'm just sort of thinking out loud here after what you just said, but I think the eye test that's the eye test is brilliant, because if you improve on that, you're seeing things that literally other people aren't. Now with data, it's
Yeah.
right in front of you, isn't it? XG, XA, all those things are right in front of you, and obviously, as you said, you have to interpret that correctly. But the eye test is so subjective that if you really can improve that, yeah, maybe that's the one. Maybe that, and that will continue as well. That's the lovely thing as well. If you can
Yeah,
improve your eye
like you'll
test.
constantly get better at it. The
Mm.
more you watch it, the more you refine your processes, understand what you're looking for. So yeah.
Do you do some reading or listen to podcasts or watch videos about football analysis too, to make you to potentially improve your FPL, or is it just watching football through the FPL lens?
So a friend actually kind of got me into seeing football in a more analytical, serious type of way. Following that was about 3 years ago, COVID-ish time. Then I went onto YouTube and I just learned some things. For example, like systems and pressing, and like learning that in a bit more depth. then from there, I always felt like I had a pretty decent football knowledge anyway, hence why I got into content creation in the first place. And once I was given like a guided path to learn from, I think then I kind of just snowballed positively quite quickly. And I just understood football. Like, look, there's loads of people who are better than me, but in relative terms, I learned quite a bit quite quickly to allow me just to improve my eye test. I read certain sources. I don't watch or listen too much, but I most certainly do read on Twitter a few accounts which I like to learn from.
All right, Jan. Well, I think we're coming to the end of the chat. We've got two more questions.
Yeah.
Before we do that, just a final thank you from me. It's been such a good chat, fascinating chat. Yeah, so to give up your evening, I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Of course.
So the first one, I'm going to continually say on this podcast that this is meant to be a conversation that celebrates FPL and all the good things. So with that in mind, what is your favorite ever FPL moment?
Oh,
I'll give you a
I'll
couple
be honest,
of
I don't have as good of a memory when it comes to this type of stuff as other people. Like, other people just whip out stuff on the timeline. I'm like, how do you remember that?
They do.
What was my favorite? One comes to mind instantly. I'm just trying to think if there were any better than that. Okay, this probably isn't the best, right?
Okay.
I know for a fact that I'd have enjoyed something more, but I can't think of anything else on the spot. But the De Bruyne haul against Wolves in that double game week when he scored 4. I believe I had him. I know I did have him captained that week, and I think he got 30 points or 60 for me, and that was a very, very nice like evening. I remember I was sitting in my room at uni, watching it on the laptop, and it was just goal after goal, and I was like, "This is good, man. This is good." So yeah, I enjoyed that a lot.
If you, I mean, that is a great one. If you think of another one straight after the pod, you can just tweet me, and I can just add that in,
Yeah.
say in the show notes. But yeah, no, that's good. That's an excellent one. And that is the thing that so I've done a few of these now, and I always sort of relate it to those moments are similar to when you hear a song that takes you back to a certain amount of time. And you just said that, like you remember you were at uni, you were looking at your laptop, and it sort of takes you straight back there.
That's actually a really good point. I even remember what I was wearing while I was watching the game. So yeah, it's actually a very, very good point. I remember what I was doing before, after. Yeah, it's a very good point actually.
FPL is a weird game, isn't it? Okay, so final question. What is the best piece of FPL advice you have ever been given?
Oh, good point.
Again, take your time.
Patience, pretty simple one, but patience. I was advised to be more patient. I think it worked for me. So yeah, I would say just being a bit more patient.
And before we wrap up, how does that work with aggression though? Because you're quite an aggressive manager.
Yeah, it's more so like understanding when to time that aggression. You can't just be aggressive all over the place and constantly do it. You have to understand the timing, and I think getting a better look into patience kind of allowed me to do that. Yeah, I would say, however, I came to the conclusion to use my gut a bit less and be a little bit more analytical, cold-blooded, I would say, with my decisions. That was another good bit of advice. I imagine that was more filtered just around being on the timeline and other good managers. So I'd probably say those two things.